Guys, today we'll be starting with GIT, and in GIT, the first topic that comes to our mind is gastrointestinal secretions, and basically the process of getting food absorbed is through all sort of secretion. Okay, so the basic idea of digestion is that you give your body something very complex in nature, and then your body tries to reduce it, and it reduces and it reduces and it reduces further, and in the end we get a byproduct of these things. We get some sort of very simpler form of that complex product, and in this whole process we generate a lot of waste. Not a lot of waste, but we generate waste. We generate some sort of metabolites, and those metabolites are further removed by a body in the form of feces or poop. So that was the whole GIT in simple words. Okay, so the introduction we starts with secretion, and we need secretion in everything. We need secretion in our stomach, we need secretion in duodenum, we need secretion in jejunum, we need secretion in everywhere. Okay, in large intestine, from the liver, from the pancreas, and today we'll be covering this secretion part. Okay, so the first point here is that digestion and absorption of the food requires some sort of GI secretion. Of course, that is, secretion is mainly enzymes and some sort of motility. Motility means movement, and both of these things are regulated by hormones and are regulated by enteric nervous system. So our enteric nervous system is not voluntary, right? You cannot tell your stomach to, okay, let's start eating, let's start digesting. So basically what happens is that it comes under the big umbrella term. It's called ANS, right? Autonomic nervous system. And autonomic nervous system has three branches: sympathetic, parasympathetic, and then this little branch called ENS, called enteric. Enteric means gastric, or something related with intestine. Enteric nervous system, right? So GI hormones. We need GI hormones. Why? Because GIT is so complex that it can lead to delay. Of course, it can lead to delay because it's a very complex part, and that's why evolution has given us a nervous system, so that it can, the whole, every sort of calculation, every type of everything, it's done locally. So that's the whole idea of enteric nervous system. That's why we have enteric nervous system, a little brain of our GID. So evolution is that hydra and jellyfish had brain around their GI tract, around their stomach, and later on our brain could never multitask this much processing which is done in our stomach. So we developed a secondary brain, that is the main brain we know, and now we have a little brain on our stomach. So that's why we have enteric nervous system. So I think about these ideas, like why even we have these enteric nervous system, what's the use of that? And it turns out that it's an evolutionary system. So the layers of GI tract. Well, the layers of GI tract is, number one is serosa. So serosa is usually the outermost layer. Serosa means something like whey. Whey is like watery, milky, and osa means the layer, means that's it. So serosa means serum plus osa, that is full of, and that is serous, right? So serous, fluidy, whey, full of layer. Okay, so it's a fluidy layer. It's an outermost fluidy layer. And usually when we have any sort of itis, that is inflammation, it usually attacks at the serosa. So that's the key idea here. GI motility, it means the movement that are done by the GI tract, the whole GI tract. It means starting from your buccal cavity, that is the mouth, ending to our rectum, to the poop center. Everything has a motility, right? So GI motility is done via something called as muscularis propria, right? Now, what is propria? What's the meaning of the word propria? It means one's own, okay, or belongs to, right? And what basically propria means is that whenever we see propria word, it means connective tissue. So muscularis propria has longitudinal muscles and circular muscles. Why not latitudinal? Longitudinal means they are like that, long, and latitudinal means they are like that. So this whole GI system is a circular tract, right? It's a cylinder, so we can't really have any sort of latitudinal muscles. So that's why these latitudinal muscles later were renamed as circular muscles. So opposite of longitudinal is circular, not latitudinal, right? It's a cylinder. Second point is that we have something called as submucosa. Submucosa is that when we have a mucosal membrane, right, and then under beneath that we have this membrane called submucosa. Now, GI motility is controlled by these muscularis propria, and is done by my enteric plexus called Auerbach plexus. Now, our Auerbach, or whatever you want to call it, this Auerbach plexus is one of the scientists' name. He was German, and that's why we named him Auerbach. So myenteric plexus means just bunch of nerves. Okay, so these myenteric plexus, they are just bunch of nerves all across the GIT. Okay, so we have something called a submucosa plexus as well. So submucosa plexus is controlled by submucosal plexus. Now this myenteric is muscular enteric, means muscular GIT plexus controls the movement, okay, motility. But submucosal plexus, aka regulates GI circulation. It is Meissner's plexus. What is Meissner? Meissner is the name, one of the scientists' name. He was German as well. The whole theme of this whole chapter was that whole lot of Germans, they they were really talented people, and they just named whole system by themselves. You will see a lot of names, and most of them are named after German scientists. What about mucosa? Mucosa is the innermost layer. Mucus means very watery, so they produce mucosa, right? And at the mucosa we have muscularis mucosa, right? And it alters, it means it can change surface area. Why do we need to change surface area? So that we can get maximum sort of absorption out of them. So muscularis mucosa is responsible for the absorption. Now this surface area is very thin, smooth surface area, and it's thin because we need a lot of absorption happening through this layer. Now this is a thin muscular micro motions like this, and there are like micro motion happening right there at this layer, so that a lot of grinding, a lot of churning is happening right here, so that we get the maximum nutrition out of the food. So that's the concept of these four layers. So we have four layers: serosa, we have submucosa, and then we have mucosa, right? Three layers, and we have two enteric system. That is, one is submucosal plexus, and one is myenteric. Myenteric goes for the motility, that the movement, and submucosal plexus goes for the secretions. Okay. Another concept right here we have written as daily water turnover in GIT. So what here happens is that all the water that comes from plasma, right, it comes from that is extracellular fluid, and it goes to the gut. And what happens here is that it's a biochemical reaction, and gut must stay wet, not dry, because the food which is inside your gut can actually burrow inside your cavity, inside your enterocytes. Or just recall what are enterocytes. Enterocytes are the sites which are present in the GIT, right? So the food in the dry mucosa would actually burn the mucosa. So that's why we need water turnover. Water turnover, what is water turnover? Water turnover basically is that water keeps turning back from ECF, that is extracellular fluid, and plasma inside your GIT, and then it goes back. Like it's like a water movement, right? So that your GIT stays wet. Your GIT want to stay wet because this wet system actually supports a lot of function. For example, one of the number one function is just protection from really harsh food shit that we can eat, and so that's one concept. Another concept is that you want water so that the movement is facilitated, right? So the total water in GIT is around 9 liters. Okay, not 9 liters. Yeah, we can call it 9 liters or whatever you want to call it. It's around 900 ml, and 900 ml per day in 24 hours. That's like moving, and 8,800 ml is reabsorbed, and in the stool you only get about 200 ml. So that's very less if you think about it, right? Because 200 out of 9,000, right, into 10 into 100, so we get like 2 point something percent, like 2.2, that is lost inside the stool, right? Inside the shit. Stool is shit. So 1% of our 1% of uh, what I'm trying to call is that 1% of BMR, okay? It's not BRC, it's BMR. B, what did I write? BMR. BMR means basal metabolic rate. Calories are lost in digestion, okay? So it's very, very, very efficient, okay? So that's the concept, right? So intestinal fluids that are, that provide the fluid inside the GIT is around 2 liters. GI secretion alone provides around 1500 plus, just add this whole up. I mean, the whole concept here is that stomach provides like maximum around 2.5 liters per day, and jejunum, the small intestine part, provides the maximum around 5500 ml. Now, like a jug of water, it's okay, 5 liters of water. But the thing is that it's like reabsorbed. All of it is almost reabsorbed, and you don't lose a lot of water here. Interesting fact about jejunum is that jejunum is the maximum area of maximum place of reabsorption of water. So whenever we see any sort of reabsorption phenomena that's not happening very well, so we try to think about jejunum. Okay, so that's the watershed here. Another thing is that we have saliva in our body, and what's the number one cause? What's the not the cause? The number one function. The number one function of saliva and other secretion in our mouth. I mean, that's the only saliva is the only secretion. The number one function is just digestion of mainly carbs, and protective function. Protective function. What are you gonna protect against? We'll read about it. It's very amazing. So we have 3 major glands and 2 minor glands for saliva. Okay. Now these 3 major glands are, first is parotid, second is sublingual. Sublingual means beneath the tongue. Parotid, it's just behind your parotid, right? Behind your this tongue, right? Submandibular means just beneath your mandible. So this is the mandible thing, and we have this gland right underneath it. So we have 3 major. So these 3 are one of the major producers of saliva, and we have 2 minor glands that produce saliva as well. So those 2 salivary glands are Weber's gland, that's actually tonsils. And the meaning of tonsil is like almond like. So whenever you see any sort of tonsils, I hope you can remember this almond picture. And another minor salivary gland is von Ebner's gland, and this von Ebner's gland it's amazing. I'll tell you why. And this von Ebner's gland is under the base of our tongue. So we have 2, Weber's and von Ebner's, right? And we have 3 main, that are parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. Okay, so a little bit about pH and a little bit about this quality of saliva, right? So the property of saliva is that its pH is neutral. It's around 7. I'll tell you why it's around 7. And it's hypotonic to plasma. Hypotonic means it has less number of particles inside than in comparison with plasma. Plasma, for example, has around 300 particles, right? And for example, saliva has around only like 20 or maybe 100. I don't know right now. So why is it like that, right? What's the physical relevance? What's the physical? Why God gave us hypotonic, saliva in relation with plasma? Why plasma is hypertonic? Well, saliva and blood never mix together. That's very important to understand, because saliva comes from plasma. Plasma is the source of saliva, and it's hypotonic because it has more water in it and less solute in it, right? And we know that solute like Na are removed actively, like ATPases, right? We use ATP actively to remove this sodium out of our saliva, because I'll tell you why. Because if it was hypertonic, that is, number of sodium particle was more in saliva, it would dry the mouth really quickly. Because imagine you have hypertonic saliva, a lot of water from our extracellular space in the buccal cavity would just rush out of their extracellular space into our mouth, because our mouth is really hypertonic. Imagine you eat or maybe just have something really salty. What happens is that you get dry mouth after that, right? Or you have like a chips, like a bag of chips, right? Once you have this bag of chips, what will happen that water from the extracellular space in your buccal cavity, it will rush out of this extracellular space and it will rush inside your buccal cavity and it will go inside your stomach, and later on you will feel dry mouth. So to avoid this sort of situation, God gave us this hypotonic saliva which keeps watering our buccal cavity, right? So hypertonic saliva, it will dry the mouth, and I mean water follows the hypertonicity. So I mean that's why. Second thing is that we have hypotonic saliva is that it really helps to make sure that enamel is healthy. Enamel is this layer on your teeth, which is a very hard layer on your teeth. So imagine if we have any sort of acidic saliva. If we have really acidic saliva, then it's gonna just remove that enamel. So that's very important. And hydration of the teeth, because we need hydration. If we don't have hydration, if we don't have constant hydration, what will happen that bacteria will start to stay there, and they'll start to have reproduction, and then they'll grow their colony. Other thing is that these taste buds on our tongue are very sensitive to pH. Okay, so pH has to be normal. So that's one idea about the pH and tonicity of the saliva. So that was a little bit about saliva. Let's talk a little bit about function of the saliva. Well, we have three functions: digestion, we have enzymes that are involved in the digestion, and lubrication and protection, right? 3 or 4, whatever you want to call it. So number one point here is that in your buccal cavity, in your mouth, there is no digestion of protein. Why? Because protein digestion needs around 1.5 to 3 pH, a very acidic environment. Why do we need acidicity in protein? Because we need to break these polypeptide bonds of complex amino acids. So I hope we understand that protein digestion needs some acidity to it, because we need to break these bonds, right? Carbohydrates, on the other hand, they need something called as amylase. Now these amylase are responsible for breaking these complex carb chains. Okay, once they obliterate or maybe break these carb chains, we can get simpler carbohydrates and then can get these things inside our body easily. Fats, on the other hand, need something called as lipases. So these lipases, I told you, these von Webner's gland. This is amazing. How? Because this von Webner gland produces these lingual lipases, and they can further break these complex fatty acid chains into simpler fatty acids, and then further we can get fat consumption. All right. So we as humans can produce these amylases and lipases, right? And they can further give us some carbs and fat absorption through our buccal cavity. So that's the idea of saliva. Protection is that these saliva, they contain something called as secretory IgA, immunoglobulin A. Now this immunoglobulin A and these, I'll tell you a concept here. So one concept that the blood immunoglobulin, right? The immunoglobulin A that is present in the blood is a monomer, right? But buccal cavity immunoglobulin A are dimers, okay? Present 2. And they are more adhesive in nature, and they are more adhesive in nature, and they have more surface area for antigen presenting. Okay, so that's why secretory immunoglobulin A can be a little bit superior than serum immunoglobulins, because they are just in dimers. Other thing, we have lactoferrin and lysosomes. So we understand lactoferrin and lysosomes both are bactericidal or antibacterial, whatever you want to call them. So we know 4 function of saliva: protection, lubrication, digestion, or 3 function, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so till now we understand saliva, right? We understand the function of saliva, right? Let's talk a little bit about salivon. Now these salivons are these little functional units of salivary glands, right? These are salivary glands, and inside these salivary glands we have salivon, right? Little bit of salivons everywhere, right? And these salivons have 2 parts. First is acinus, that are acinar cells, okay? And second is the duct, which carries the saliva, right? So acinus, the word meaning of acinus is berry-like, right? It looks like a berry on a microscope, and mostly it's an exocrine. It means it produces outside, and it produces its product and pushes outside. So it's an exocrine. And SNR, whenever we see some sort of SNR, just relate this SNR with some sort of exocrine function. Okay. So SNR, these are primary secretory cells. They produce something called as primary secretion, which is very similar to plasma. It's watery, right? Thing is that we have duct cell, these duct, and these duct cell have just some space inside them, right? And they have two functions: reabsorption and secretion. They produce shit inside the saliva and they take some shit out. So that's the concept here. So reabsorption, they want to reabsorb some sodium, they want to reabsorb some chloride. Why they want to reabsorb these things? So that it's not rough on our gums, because these are really hard solvents. These are really hard ions, right? Chloride it can just remove the epidermal layer on your gums. So we don't want a lot of sodium and chloride. Secretion. The secretion of ductal cells inside our saliva is potassium and bicarb. Now this bicarb produces alkalicity, like the basicity, okay? And this potassium is done inside, is done to, let's see, because Na has been removed from the saliva and we need to balance the ion because Na was a hard solvent. We removed Na for the sake of our gums. Now, once we remove the Na, removal of Na leads our saliva a little bit negatively charged. What is negative charge? What is positive charge? If you think about positive charge, is just that when we have some sort of charge in a space, and negative charge is just when we don't have a charge. So removal of Na leads to negative charge. It means it has no charge, and we need some charge there because we need this saliva to be electrically neutral, right? We don't want it to have negative charge or some sort of positive charge. We don't want it to be ionic. So we put some potassium inside our saliva so that we can electrically neutralize it. So because Na has been removed from the saliva, need to balance the ion balance, and that's why we put a little bit of potassium inside our saliva. Other reason for bicarb to be inside our saliva is that bicarb is great with dealing with bacterial acidity, because bacteria, a lot of type of bacteria can produce some sort of acids, and these acids can for the reproduction of these acids, right? And what happens here is that we put some base on it and then they can neutralize it. We can just kill them, not kill them, just a little bit dealing, that's it. We're not gonna kill them with base. So other concept is that during high flow rates, whenever we are hungry, as we are very hungry, we see a food, we see some sort of McDonald's, we are very hungry, we want to eat that. So our production of saliva increases, right? So if our production of saliva increases, the time of reabsorption decreases, of course. And what happens here is that when the time of reabsorption decreases, what happens that this Na and Cl, they are lost inside our saliva. And once they are lost inside the saliva, what happens that later water follows this saliva, and then we feel a little bit of dry mouth after we have been salivating for a long time. So this means that less time for saliva, less time for reabsorption of sodium and chloride lead to increased secretion of Na and chloride, because they have not been reabsorbed. I think that's a very simple concept to really think about it. I mean, you're very hungry and you're salivating and you're just really drooling over something, and then a lot of Na and chloride is being lost inside your saliva. Once it's lost, water later follows because it's an active solvent. It produces this gradient. Water want to follow this gradient, and then we are a little bit dry mouth after this whole drooling is over. So that's the concept about saliva. Let's talk a little bit about regulation of secretion. Let's talk a little bit about bradykinin, how bradykinin can change things up, how the innervation of saliva is done. We'll talk about it. Okay, so regulation of secretion. Now the saliva is secreted, right? And we need some sort of regulators. Why we need some sort of regulators? Because we don't want a lot of drooling. We don't want to lose a lot of Na and chloride inside our saliva that can further lead to a lot of dryness in the mouth. because if mouth is very dry, we will have some sort of injury. So salivation is an unconditional reflex, right? Now let's try to understand this term called unconditional reflex first. Now, what is an unconditional reflex? Well, unconditional reflex is a natural, right? It's an inborn automatic response of our body to any sort of specific external stimulus. Okay, it does not require any sort of learning. So a baby will salivate. Okay, so it's present from birth, right? And it is controlled by lower nervous system centers, right, like brainstem or spinal cord. So that's the idea of unconditional nervous system, right? And salivation is one of the really big unconditional reflex because food enters through our mouth, and imagine if we fail to produce this saliva, it'll be a big problem to chew and to make this bolus of food inside our mouth. So I mean, it's amazing how it works, honestly. So that's one concept about salivation. So salivation caused by food in our mouth is unconditional because it is an innate. It's automatic. It's not learned. It's just present inside your medulla. Okay, and it's positively affected by parasympathetic system. One concept in GIT is that most of the GIT is positively affected. Positively means more secretion is positively affected by parasympathetic and is negatively affected by sympathetic, because we know sympathetic deals with stressful situation, and you don't want to start digesting your food when a freaking lion is behind you. So that's the idea behind this concept, that parasympathetic system is just eat and relax, and relax and eat, whatever you want to call it. So that's the idea of parasympathetic system. So regulation of saliva, right? It's regulated by autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means it's not been under your control, right? We have this ganglion, preganglion. Okay, that's another concept right there. So autonomic nervous system, it has two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, it increases the secretion of thick saliva, of course. Thick saliva, why it is thick? Why? Let's talk about it. And parasympathetic profound increases on the secretion of thin watery saliva. So what happens in the night is that when we are sleeping, a lot of parasympathetic activity is going on in our buccal cavity. Well, it's not really going on in our buccal cavity. The whole parasympathetic activity diffusely gets activated in whole body parts, right? In all of the body, parasympathetic system, takes a drive, and then you have profound watery secretion, thin watery secretion, right? Now, why is it watery and why is it thick? Let's talk about it. Well, there is something called as acetylcholine. It's a neurotransmitter. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It excites. So acetylcholine goes to these M3 receptors, right? And once they get activated, the intracellular calcium level increases. And we know that calcium is one of the very biggest, signaling molecule in this cellular space, right? So once this cellular, calcium goes up, we have exocytosis of these enzymes, right? These exocytosis of enzyme poor water, right? And once the parasympathetic is activated, we have some sort of bradykinin release, right? And once we have some sort of bradykinins in our bradykinin, they come from heavyweight kinin chains and they give us bradykinin. These are just mediators of parasympathetic system. And once we have bradykinin, think about bradykinin as inflammation. Okay, so what happens in inflammation? You want to have vasodilation because you want to have these immune cells come to the site of inflammation to deal with the inflammation. Now, bradykinin, they usually one of the very famous bradykinin is E2, and this E2 actually leads to vasodilation. And then when the vasodilation happens, then this capillary hydrostatic pressure increases, right? Now, when the capillary hydrostatic pressure increases, right? So what happens here is that more blood flows into the capillaries, right? Because of the vasodilation, right? And this increases the filtration of plasma into interstitial space. So imagine we have more, water and ions into these acinar cells, right? So let me explain you better this concept. So these are our acinar cells, and this is our duct cell, right? And here is our capillaries and arteries and everything, right? So this is my this is my capillary, and we have bradykinin, and then these bradykinin leads to vasodilation. The vasodilation increases. Now this dilation happens because of the smooth muscles, and once the dilation happens, so we have these capillaries and arteries, right? So when these artery dilate due to bradykinin and nitric oxide, more blood flows into the capillaries as well, right? And it raises their hydrostatic pressure, right? Now pressure is being increased. So this pressure actually increases the filtration rate into the interstitial space, because we are going to lose a lot of iron inside this interstitial space, right? And once we lose this interstitial ions, when we lose these ions inside the interstitial space, it will bring water will follow the ions, right? And then this ions and water will go inside these SNR cells, because these are just the saliva is made from plasma, right? So in this whole concept, the whole concept is that bradykinin lead to watery saliva, because more water and ions are dumped inside the SNR cells, and this supports the water and saliva formation. So whole concept here is that the blood flow, right? So bradykinin lead to vasodilation, leads to more blood flow to the salivary glands, lead to more secretion. Okay. Now think about the thalamus, right? The thalamus itself doesn't directly causes any sort of this exocytosis. Now it's really more accurate to say that higher cortical centers like maybe hypothalamus can really modulate our salivary reflexes, or not reflexes, salivary process, because we know that the head center of these parasympathetic and sympathetic system is these hypothalamus, right? So I hope we understand this part. Another question that raises right now is that why sympathetic system leads to increased secretion of thick saliva. Well, when we are like really stressed, or when we are like really emotional, right? So sympathetic systems are activated, right? And we have increased heart rate, we have we have blood shift going on, we are sweating a lot, right? And salivary composition actually changes, right? Now sympathetic system actually activates salivary glands, right? So what happened here is that once the system is activated, what happens is that we want to lose as little water as possible in saliva, because water is now an expense right now, because your body is in stress. So increased level of camp leads to exocytosis of stored proteins, right? And result is that this leads to minimum stimulation of these ion transport, right? So little water is secreted in this way, and the result is that we have very small volume, but this small volume is very viscous and thick, and it's really high in mucus and enzymes, right? Because we are really stressed. Okay. And why it really feels thicky, I mean, for example, right now I think I'm going inside this sympathetic nervous system, because my mouth is really sticky right now. So I'm very passionate about it, right? So what happened here is that this sympathetic tone, right, it increases, and this reduces the watery flow. So now my saliva is really protein rich, and it is producing this sticky saliva that coats my mouth, and that's why I am having this sort of dry mouth sensation, like I'm trying to water my own buccal cavity, because I am a little bit stressed, because I may say something really stupid on the video. So I hope this can explain the whole concept of sympathetic and parasympathetic system. So that was regulation of secretion. We know these things. Physiologic factor that can affect saliva is that increase smell can increase, of course, thought of food, decreases sleep, fear, fatigue. So yeah, we know that. Innervation of salivary gland. This is very amazing topic. Wow. Innervation, they are innervated in two ways. First is cranial nerve number 9, and second is the facial nerve. Cranial nerve number 7. Okay. So let's talk about 7 first. So cranial nerve number 7. Now this is a facial nerve, right? It is like that, right? And now this facial nerve gives branch to submandibular ganglion, right? And once this submandibular ganglion is activated, it goes to submandibular gland, because this is one of the salivary gland. And then this innervation still goes into sublingual gland. These two are major salivary glands, submandibular and sublingual. And once they are innervated, we produce saliva. Other thing is that this cranial nerve number 9 has innervation on the otic ganglion, right? Now this otic ganglion is just underneath parotid gland. Now this nerves from the otic goes to parotid, and then parotid is able to produce saliva. Cool thing here is that once we have any sort of injury in the cranial nerve number 7, it can lead to some small problems in the production of saliva, right? So increased chances of injury due to cranial nerve number 7 during parotid surgery. So you are going to through a parotid surgery, right? And you have some sort of injury that has happened to your cranial nerve number 7. Now what will happen is that you can have really abnormalities. How? So injury to this facial nerve, right, or cranial nerve number 7, right? So what will happen here is that during the regeneration of this cranial nerve number 7, you can have innervation to the sweat glands as well. Like this will go to the sweat glands, and this regeneration can also innervate lacrimal gland. Lacrimal means crying. You want to cry. So every time you will salivate, you will sweat, and every time will you salivate, you will cry. So it's really amazing how it works, honestly. And I have no idea why the hell did I write cranial nerve number 9 here. Leave it. Okay, so here saliva, right? Abnormality in salivary glands. We already talked about this abnormality due to cranial nerve number 7. If the secretion of the saliva goes down, we call is xerostomia, dry mouth, right? Commonly seen in people with mumps and Sjogren syndrome, right? Now this syndrome called Sjogren syndrome, right? It spells at Sjogren syndrome, right? And I call this as Sjogren syndrome. And what here is happening is that it's an autoimmune disease, right, of exocrine glands. And we know that this acinar cell is one of the exocrine gland, right? So mainly salivary glands and lacrimal glands are both affected here, right? So xerostomia is just abnormal dryness of the mouth due to decreased or absent saliva, right? And it can occur due to a lot of reasons, right? It can occur due to some gland destruction, due to some nerve damage. Maybe there is some damage at the cervin, or maybe there is some damage at otic ganglion, right? Or it can also happen of anticholinergic, right, drugs, because I'll tell you why. Or it can because of dehydration, or it can because of radiation, right? So what here, because I don't want to go to the different topic, I'll tell you about the this anticholinergic drugs, how it happens. But I want to first come to this Sjogren syndrome. So why Sjogren syndrome causes xerostomia? The number one reason is that we have these lymphocytes, and these lymphocytes are attacking our own salivary glands that are CD4 positive, right? And they attack our own acinar cells that are the king of production of saliva, and they stop this production of saliva because atrophy of this gland tissue happens. And if there is atrophy, it means there is some sort of damage, right? And almost all type of damage lead to fibrosis. And once we have fibrosis on the gland tissue, it will lead to loss of function, right? So that's why we have less saliva production in xerostomia, and we have less tear as well. So we have dry eyes and dry mouth. So what happens? It's like the main head complaint of Sjogren syndrome is that I can't eat my biscuit, and I feel that I have some mud or some dirt in my eyes. So this is one of the very cool thing. And what else? Okay, so we understand this. What about mumps? Well, mumps can cause xerostomia because mumps is caused by something called as mumps virus, right? And this really infects, right, our salivary glands, especially something called as parotid gland, right here. So mumps love parotid glands. Okay, now the mechanism of action of this mump is that a lot of replication in glandular epithelial tissue happens, right? A replication of virus, right? And it causes inflammation, swelling, right? And these inflamed ducts, right, and inflamed acinar cells, they get either destroyed or they get compressed because of the inflammation. So once they get destroyed or compressed, the salivary flow will decrease, of course, and it will lead to xerostomia. But cool thing here is that in Sjogren syndrome you can have destruction of these glands, but here in mumps usually after recovery most of the function returns to the normal. So it's if you lose your saliva due to mumps, it can be a positive news, but if you lose your saliva due to Sjogren syndrome, it can be a problem. So we have absent secretion, that is aptylism. I don't know how to call this. aptyalism. Okay, so that's cool, right? So I hope we understand saliva, right? So we have 3 major glands and 2 minor. The von Ebners make these these lipid lipases, right? And these important glands, parotid is done by mumps, and submandibular and sublingual can be affected by this Sjogren syndrome. Remember that Sjogren's comes with this complaint of dry eyes and dry mouth, right? Because of the CD4 positive T helper cells are producing this immune complex response on your these glands, right? Saliva, we have acinar cells, right? Acinous exocrine ductal cells responsible for the reabsorption and secretion, reabsorption of NaCl, right? And secretion of potassium and bicarb. So that was saliva.